All right, so we are on week 4 of the summer class, 4 of 5 really. And we've talked about the macroeconomic stuff, the Fed, inflation, which is honestly, I think these are the biggest stories from COVID, the COVID economy. But what we're doing this week is talking about gender and race. And I'll give a little background about why I'm doing this. But next week, we're going to be talking about some microeconomic stuff, specifically certain industries. And to be honest with you, I'm still trying to decide which industries to cover, right? Because like every industry was affected. But we kind of, I'm devoting the bulk of the class to macro stuff, some micro, and then we got this week. So I teach a class called the Economics of Race and Gender. I really like the class because it's basically labor economics, but it's taught in a way that's very applicable to um, a lot of different stuff out there. Um, so I'm going to talk about the gender stuff first, and then we'll go into the race stuff. And to talk about the gender stuff, I don't know that we need a whole lot of like models. I'll do this little simple model today. The race stuff, we do need to give a bit of background for the race stuff. All right, so this recession, I don't know if you guys have heard, has been referred to as the she-cession, versus the financial crisis was referred to as the man-cession. That one actually hit financial services particularly hard, which is male dominated, and manufacturing, which is also male dominated. This one has been argued to have affected women more. And so there's a couple of reasons for this. One, think of the jobs women do, right? Education, healthcare, things like this. These end up being really important jobs in this recession. But the other thing is just the division of labor. So one thing that's out there, and you can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics American Time Use Survey, if you really want to dig into the numbers, women on average do more non-market labor. And it's actually really interesting. We go into the numbers in class. Men do more yard work. I'm looking at my yard right now. Women do more childcare, women do more cleaning, stuff like this. Men watch more TV. Yeah, I know. It's so stereotypical. What happened is in the 1980s, like men started doing a lot more work, and then it kind of has leveled off. So I put on average on there because my husband would get mad at me because in our marriage we try to do things 50-50, and he'd be like, not all marriages are like that. Yeah, that's true, but on average women do. So the share of childcare was higher for women than men when schools shut down. So basically, I don't know if you guys are like also traumatized by this. Like I think of March of 2020 and having my kid at home. But when the kid needed something, kids in general will go to mom and not dad. Not all the time, but certainly with mine. And there's a couple of reasons, like in my household, that I did more of this than my husband. Number one, I have tenure, right? Number two, I had the flexible job. I was able to go asynchronous online. He had to be in meetings all day. But it was very uneven in our household, and I would suspect that it was uneven in a lot of yours as well. Be curious to hear though, because you guys are teachers, right? So maybe it was different in your households. The other thing that happened is women permanently dropped out of the labor force. So I keep talking about this conference I went to in January. One of the things everyone is talking about is labor force participation rates. Oh my God, they're so down, they're so far down. When people aren't participating in the labor force, our potential output is suffering, and we've got constraints on the economy. I don't know why anyone's confused about this. Why did people drop out of the labor force? Because it was super hard to be working full time with your kids at home. And then on top of it, childcare centers have shut down, as you'll read. So I'm having you guys read several articles. One of them is an article about Betsy Stevenson, who's a very famous economist. She wrote this article in Politico about how the child care crisis is exacerbated by COVID. Another is an interview with an economist named Claudia Goldin. She is from Harvard. She's the first woman at Harvard to get tenure. I looked her up. And she talks about greedy jobs and how men and women can't both do greedy jobs. Someone has to have the flexible job, and women tend to do those. I've also given you just like a little update about the child care center shutting down. And then I've given you an article about the education gap by race. All right, so let's look at labor force participation rates for men and women. And so you see me do this all the time. Fred, female labor force participation rate. Fred male labor force participation rate. And this is something I talked about last class. I Google stuff in class all the time because I want students to be able to pull it up themselves. Hey, I'm not making up data. This is how you find good data. So if we look at the female labor force participation rate, we see the impact of COVID here. So the labor force participation rate was 57.9, and then its lowest, it was 54.6, so we saw that it dropped. And maybe more importantly, we still are below. So it was 57.9 pre-COVID. It's 56.8 after COVID. Let's look at the male one, though. All right, so we see a big drop here, too. So 69, I think it says 69.3, drops to 66.1, 69.3 to 68.0. So basically what I'm showing you is, hey, a lot of people dropped out of the labor force. This story about it just hitting women, I don't know, is telling the whole story. So we did see women drop out of the labor force, but we also saw other people drop out of the labor force as well. One thing we do know, though, is that a lot of times women choose more flexible jobs and things like that, and I think that's really where the real story is going to be here. So you're going to read the Stevenson article. I just gave it to my students, and one of them complained, "This is an old article." Isn't that funny? 2020 is old. I said, yes, I know, but we can do the updates. So one of her predictions is that women were going to drop out of the labor force in fall of 2020. I'm just telling you, they actually did. You can play around with the data. You'll see there was a little drop in fall of 2020. Did child care centers close? Yes, they did. 9% of them, as you'll read. And then the other thing, she's complaining a lot about the stimulus bill, the CARES Act, saying Delta Airlines got more funding than all child care combined. And the second large, so there was like a second stimulus bill that was kind of small in the middle. The third stimulus bill, the American Recovery Plan, or whatever it is, April of 2021. That one did provide more funding for childcare. And it's funny because I didn't know the answer to it. I was like, did it? But I got the money, right? Do you guys remember getting the child tax credit pre-payments if you have kids? So there was money given to parents. It was a tax credit, but they decided to give people the credit before their taxes were due. There was also more money given to daycare centers, so there actually was more money in the second bill. All right, so I'm giving my final tomorrow for the economics of race and gender. And one of the questions I'm asking them is, draw the market for childcare, assuming typical demand and supply curves. What happened when 9% of childcare centers closed? It's a decrease in supply, so the price of childcare is going to go up, and the quantity of it's going to go down. So if I think about the impact of COVID on gender, or on things like the pay gap, that's notable, okay? So when childcare gets more expensive, a couple things happen. Number one, the cost benefit of working changes. So it just, there's going to be people who decide they're not going to work. They're going to look at their paycheck, they're going to look at the cost of daycare, and they're going to say, I'm just going to stay at home with my kids, right? And that's going to change as the price goes up. The second thing is the cost benefit analysis of working flexible jobs changes. So a simple model can demonstrate this. So this is just, it's a model I actually use in my Developing Nations class as well. What we've got here is we've got years of experience. Okay, so you can assume maybe it's like an 18-year-old. This is like age of 18 over here. And this is your earnings. And then we just usually put direct costs of schooling here just because it's in the same, it's in dollars, so why not? So what we've got here is someone who starts working at the age of 18. Okay, and we can see they get raises. At some point their earnings go down as they might start to work fewer hours as they get older, something like that. And then this right here would be someone who goes to college, to a four-year college. You can see they start at a higher level of earnings, and then their subsequent raises are higher. A couple reasons for this. Maybe they have more upward mobility, but also if you're getting like a 3% raise every year, 3% of a higher amount is a higher raise. You know what I mean? So we've got this here. This is the benefits. This is the benefits of going to college. And then here we've got the direct cost down here. But this is the opportunity cost. So we've got 4 years of missed wages. And you say, well, how much would I value the missed wages at? Well, whatever the 18-year-old is getting when they start working. So this is the typical model. I use it in developing countries for like child labor, things like this. But in this case, the helpful thing to think about is this, okay? So this is a woman that leaves the labor market to have kids. So she's got, here's her earnings if she started working at 18. Assume she goes to college, she would start at a higher level, earning more, bam, drops out of the labor force. Drops out of the labor force, let's say at age 28, from 28 to 38, she enters the labor force again. But what happens is she's not going to enter at the same level of wages, right? She's going to enter down here. And I know women that have done this. We just got a new administrative assistant for another department in my building. This woman's got a master's degree, right? But what's happening is she's entering in the labor force. She wants a flexible job because her kids are still around, but also maybe she's just not as marketable because she's taken 10 years off. So what happens is you kind of start lower, and then eventually, yeah, maybe you make up some benefits, but we've got like a lower benefit. So remember, benefits are here. So the benefit has dropped, the cost remains the same. So the simple prediction of this model is that the woman won't go to college. But we know that more women go to college than men. And so the way that I like to use this model is in choosing flexible jobs, or in choosing jobs where you can like leave and come back. So I'd be curious to hear what you guys as teachers think, because the typical job that I would teach is teaching. I would teach teaching. So you're leaving, you're a teacher, leave the labor force for 10 years. Maybe you can start where you were, right? Maybe you don't get this hit in earnings versus maybe someone who's like in IT or engineering, something like that. Man, even if I lost like 10 years of like my research skills, I would probably have to learn a whole new program. People are using new programs now, right? And so you kind of like lose skills, if you will. So what I use this model for is to describe why women would be incentivized into choosing certain fields. So women might choose to go into teaching or, I don't know, some other field where maybe you can come in and out easier. Okay. All right, so why do I teach that model? Because it has to do with the wage gap. And so the wage gap, currently women make 83 cents for every dollar that a man makes. It actually was 82 pre-COVID, but what happened is women, as we saw, left the labor market, and men. So the women that were left were like higher paid. So like the low wage women left the labor market. All right, so whatever, 83 cents for every dollar. So if someone says, that's discrimination, that's proving discrimination, that's not true, right? Because we know women are choosing to go into other jobs. And so what we do is we separate the wage gap into the explained and unexplained. And so if you look at the wage gap, it's a paper from 2017 when the wage gap was higher. The percent explained, we can look at here. So 14% of it is explained by labor force experience, meaning men have more experience. Women drop out of the labor force to have kids. Race explains part of it, region is part of it. But look at this one here, occupational category, that's huge. So that's women who are like going into lower paying fields. So if you look at like preschool teachers, 98% of preschool teachers are women. And preschool teachers are paid less, right? And so that's explaining that. Industry category, the same thing. Educational attainment's negative because more women go to college than men. And then what happens here is we've got this unexplained part. So there's this unexplained part of the wage gap. And in fact, I have a little thing down here. If you account with this data from the paper, if you account for it, observe differences, it's 91.6. So women make 91.6% of what men make that we know of. The rest is unexplained. So I'm going to pause here.